Hi, this is Michelle, a Carolyn Long supporter from Vancouver, Washington, and you're listening to Two Broads Talking Politics.
Hi everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics. I'm on in this segment with Carolyn Long, who is the Democratic nominee for the 3rd District in Washington State. Hi, Carolyn.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining me. So I'm going to start with what we usually have as our first question, which is, can you just tell us a little bit about your background and why you decided to run for Congress?
Sure. So I grew up in rural communities in the Pacific Northwest. I first lived in Rogue River, Oregon, a small sort of logging community, and then moved at age 12 to Brookings, Oregon, sort of a coastal community that was really quite small. And so I've lived in rural communities all of my life, and that was very important to me because my district has 4 rural counties, and so it's nice to be able to identify with some of the struggles that people are facing. My dad owned a small business in Brookings, John's Fresh Produce, and so I learned the produce trade, as it were, from the age of 12, working in the store. I also learned the importance of community because obviously you're interacting with somebody every day. Went to college at the University of Oregon, ended up having to pay for college by getting a job working in the produce department at Safeway. I had a strong union job. I was a journeyman by the age of 22. So I was very excited about being a union member because it allowed me to leave my undergraduate relatively debt-free. Went to New Jersey to graduate school and then came back every summer because you know what New Jersey's like in the summer. But came back to work in the dad's store, and by that time we had a small farm. After schooling, I went to Washington State University, Vancouver, and I've taught there for 23 years as a political science professor. I'm a public law scholar. My field is also American institutions and public policy. So I've really enjoyed teaching, and some of my recent work, which is on political incivility, which has grown out of my research on political polarization. And I mention that because I started to address that problem at the local level through something I started called the Initiative for Public Deliberation, where I teach my students to mediate difficult policy conversations with the goal of finding shared values and beliefs. And the reason I mention that is it's one of the reasons why I'm running for Congress. For the last couple of decades, I've seen the institution fall into a disrepair because of this polarization, and what we're increasingly seeing is the demonization of people on the other side. And I came to the conclusion that the best way to fix it is to fix it from within by electing people who see themselves as problem solvers rather than as ideologues, people who are wanting to work on solutions rather than being dogmatic about a certain ideology. And so I jumped into the race in late November, and we've been running hard ever since.
Excellent. I think you might be our single most requested guest. We've had a lot of people in your district and from Portland who've been helping out with your campaign who said, you got to talk to Carolyn Long. So super excited. So what are some of the issues that you think Congress can and should be working on? What are some of those things that you want to help solve?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think, and I like how you phrased it, which is what we can do in a sort of cooperative way. So let me start with healthcare. It's the number one reason why I'm running. And one of the things that I'd like to call people's attention to is the fact that there are bipartisan efforts in the Senate and with a few members of the House to try to fix the Affordable Care Act. It's an imperfect law, but it does provide coverage to millions of Americans, and it's been struggling for the last several years because of the Republican Party and now President Trump's deliberate attempts to undermine it, not only because they're not advertising it and helping people navigate the system, but also because of the loss, of course, of the individual mandate that was in that tax bill. It's led to instability. It's led to increased rates because insurers don't know how to handle the uncertainty, and that's something that we can fix. And Senator Patty Murray has been working with Lamar Alexander and Susan Collins, both Republicans, on this effort. So I'd like to do that in the House of Representatives, and I know that with the incoming freshmen and also some members in both parties, we can at least stop the bleeding of the Affordable Care Act. So that's a sign of a real difficult issue, but one where there's bipartisan consensus. There's also consensus on lowering the cost of prescription drugs. It breaks down a little bit when we look at how we're going to do that. I certainly want Medicare to be able to negotiate drug prices with the pharmaceutical companies, but I think that most everybody can see the almost 300% increase in prescription drug prices and say that something really has to be done to stop this crisis. I think there could be bipartisan support for investing heavily in infrastructure. Infrastructure spending is not only important to our communities, but it is also a job creator. And this is something that we see a need for throughout the country, but certainly a need in the 3rd Congressional District with investment in our roads and bridges. And then finally, I think there's a bipartisan cooperation that can help us with our education, not just funding K through 12 and pre-K programs, something, again, Patty Murray has championed, but also in trying to provide resources available to folks who do want to go to college by increasing our Pell Grant program and increasing the availability of low interest or no interest student loans for those who want to take it out. But while also saying that higher education is only one route to success, we also have to invest in our apprenticeship programs and our internship programs for those who are interested in a skill or a trade that would also provide that family wage job. So there's a couple of ideas.
So you spoke as we're talking now, it was a couple of days ago at a high school about the importance of more women becoming involved in politics at all levels. So what are some of the kinds of things that you wanted to impart to high school students about that? And what do you want all of us to be thinking about the importance of women being involved?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially in these times. I am happy to be one of 307 women running for the House of Representatives this year. And what's so remarkable about that is that it's remarkable in the first place. Women face barriers in running for office in the job force. And what you're seeing right now is a lot of women knowing just how high the costs are if you've got the wrong people in office. So one of the things I spoke to the high schoolers about is how important it is to either run for office or try to find an appointed position in a federal agency or state agency or local agency where they can become public servants, because we have to increase the number of women who are visibly in these roles because we are underrepresented. So we talked a little bit about that. I didn't get political because they were high school students, but I certainly have been talking quite a bit about how the Kavanaugh Supreme Court hearings illustrate why it's so important to have women who are in elected office. I'm sure you saw, Kelly, a bunch of older white gentlemen questioning Dr. Ford. And actually they didn't question her. They farmed it out to a female lawyer, but you saw them sitting there and then they just didn't know how to handle it. And that shouldn't be the case in, 2018. I was in graduate school during the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas hearings, and we had the Year of the Woman in 1992, and it looks like we're having to have the Year of the Woman again in 2018. That shouldn't happen. So I just talked to them about the importance of getting involved, and if not in candidates or help supporting candidates or being one themselves, in volunteering for campaigns or for nonprofit work, just getting involved civically in order to show women that they can, but also to bring a female perspective to the policy issues, because it is different on many major issues that we deal with every day, such as reproductive freedom.
You have an enormous number of endorsements, including some really big ones. Recently, Barack Obama endorsed you, and perhaps more importantly for your race, the Columbian, which is a local newspaper, endorsed you over the incumbent Republican. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the endorsements that you've gotten and sort of what the process is for getting those endorsements and what they mean to a campaign?
Sure. So let me start with the Columbian. I was very excited to get the endorsement of the Columbian. It's the biggest newspaper in our district, and they have endorsed my opponent all 4 times that she's run for this position. So I was her first challenger to be endorsed by the Columbian, and they said, and it was a very strong endorsement talking about how I was a superior candidate. I really thought that was important because they're very thorough in their process. I did an endorsement panel interview along with the other Democrats that were running before the primary. And then the day after the primary, we sat down, my opponent and I, for a 90-minute interview. It was a hard-hitting interview with a panel which asked us either about the positions we've taken while in office or votes we've taken or the positions we're taking while running. So I think that they were very thorough and very intentional in looking at both of us and what we can offer to our community. The endorsement by President Obama was just fantastic. As a constitutional law scholar, I was happy to get the endorsement of Attorney General Bob Ferguson as one of my first statewide endorsements, and then to get President Obama, who actually has also been in my field, was exciting. And of course, he's also the president. So that's just great. So we filled out a questionnaire for that one. You know, there's a couple of other endorsements I've gotten that are just exciting. The Daily Co's, I was one of 8 early endorsed candidates. So their first 8 endorsements, I was one of them. Swing Left has been just a powerhouse in helping us in our campaign. Is where we get people from all across the country, but in particular across the river, to get involved. And Citizens United was fantastic because as a candidate who's not taking any corporate PAC money, I strongly believe our system is broken because of the influence of money in politics. And just got the endorsement of Crooked Media, which was fantastic as well. So that's just been exciting to see organizations as well as state and national leaders backing this campaign. I do think it matters, you know, if you're a fan of President Obama, to know that he's endorsed our campaign. I think it gives us an extra shot in the arm. You know, if you read the Daily Co's to find out that I was one of their 8 early endorsed candidates, hopefully that shows that, you know, they're seeing something that they're liking. So I do think they do matter to a congressional campaign, and I'm really excited to have them. And from these organizations and people who I've respected for some time.
So tell me about making jam.
Yes, so that's a great question. When I was in graduate school and came back to work in my dad's store, I noticed that we had a lot of, you know, produce is very perishable, and we were growing raspberries and kiwis, and then we were losing produce because, you know, if it's not sold, it starts to, you know, break down. And so I actually started a jam business. And one of the reasons why I did it is we would sell produce to people throughout the community, and they kept on talking about their jam, and they kept on bringing us jam. And I was like, you know, I'm going to make jam, and I'm going to start a business. And so it fulfilled 2 purposes. One, of course, is to use that produce that is perishable, but the second is just to sort of have fun with different flavors. And so I started combining, this is 35 years ago. I started combining weird flavors. So I had strawberry kiwi, nectarine pineapple, blueberry lemon, and then I entered 7 of my jams in the fair, and I won the grand prize for nectarine pineapple. So I'm very proud of my jam making prowess. And I don't have any time for it, but I did do some peach bourbon and peach pineapple this year. And it was just a way for me to slow down a little bit. And then I'm going to try to give it to some of our volunteers. But I got to taste it first. I haven't tasted it jarred. So,
does the voting by mail in Washington change anything about get out the vote strategy and sort of how you're thinking about the campaign in this final month?
Great question. So, you know, as a political science professor, I think about all these things academically. And then once you start running for office, you realize all these things matter quite a bit. So the interesting thing about vote by mail is the voters fall into 3 buckets. The first third of the voters vote the first day, once they get the ballot. And they do it because they already know who they're voting for. They're probably not persuadable. And so they just want to get it out of the way, and they want to make sure they've got it done. And then a third of the voters voted the very last minute, which is just startling to me, because I just don't know what would take somebody so long to make up their mind, but they voted the very last minute. And then the other third sort of falls in between that voting period. And so to strategize, we make sure that we've got direct mail pieces that get to the voter at the same time the ballots arrive, because we know that they're collecting their mail and they're probably just getting a lot of flyers from a lot of people, but there's a high likelihood they're going to read that piece when they see the ballot. So that's one of the things that we do. We also have probably more direct mail in people's boxes than you would see on a non-vote by mail state. So it does change the strategy, and we try to, you know, at least do some direct mail as well as obviously broadcast, digital, you know, cable media buys, in order to just get our messaging out.
Is there anything else that you want to make sure we talk about?
part of it is an anecdote, I suppose, but I think it may resonate with your listeners. When I first started seriously thinking about running, which is this fall, I was with my buddy, and we would be talking about it and talking about strategy. And, at the end of every one of our conversations, I would joke, we're doing this to save the Republic. And I would sort of throw my fist in the air, doing it to save the Republic. And it was sort of a moment of levity. But I have to tell you, Kelly, we need to do this to save the Republic. I mean, I'm no longer joking. Every politician will tell you that this is the most important election in their lifetime. But I seriously think it's the most important election in our lifetime. I think the country's moving in the wrong direction. This incivility from this president and from many members of Congress, I think, is shredding our democracy. And I think we only have one chance to turn it around. I think in 2020 it's going to be too late. And so I do want people to think about it in that context. And also think about the types of people that we are electing to office. And I think I represent a number of first-time candidates who are coming from different backgrounds, who've had different life experiences, but who most importantly look at this job as a job where we want to solve problems. We want to be the nerds that get into the weeds of policy. We're not running on, slogans or catchphrases. We're running on substantive policy positions. And so we're not only going to save the Republic because we're going to solve these problems, but we're going to save the Republic because we're running campaigns that focus on the issues rather than on the politics of personal destruction, because the public has lost the appetite for it. And in my position, I was my position before this election was as a distinguished professor of public civility and civic education. And I took that title seriously as a professor, and I take it seriously as a candidate, even though I no longer have that position. And I'm running a civil, positive campaign that focuses on truth. You could run hard, and you can have contrast ads and contrast messages which point out differences of positions. That's entirely fair. But I would never attack personally anybody or their family, which has happened to me in this race. And so I really hope people will look at candidates these days that are fighting for the truth, that are running respectful campaigns, and that are really running to solve the problems that ail America. And I'm one of those candidates. And I'm so pleased to be in this race and to have the support of people in Southwest Washington and interest in our race by people like you and Sophie, who are using the podcast to sort of get our name out. So it's fantastic. And, if people want to, if they're not in Southwest Washington and they want to help, they can go to electlong.com and they can click the red donate button, because unfortunately we always need resources to get our message out. If you're in Southwest Washington in the Portland metro area, you can also sign up to volunteer by going to electlong.com and volunteer to get involved. And then, one of the things that I'm learning as an old person is the importance of social media. So I've been told that social media can be a real useful way in which people can follow us on Facebook and they can follow us on Twitter, which will help amplify our positive message and our story out there in the social media stratosphere. So just wanted to throw that in at the end because we're going to get to the finish line successfully through the assistance of people in the community and outside the community who are interested in helping our democracy.
All right, fantastic. And we will put the link to your website up on our website as well, and we'll push you out on social media.
Thank you so much, Kelly. It will be very helpful. And I just have to tell you how thankful I am that you and Sophie are doing these podcasts and using this medium, because I think it's really getting to a lot of people. And I love the title about two broads. I'm sorry I didn't get to meet the other broad, but I'm happy to have been the second broad in this conversation. It just shows the power of women, and I think it is women who will make the difference in this election in 2018.
I'm here in this segment with Lisa Brown, who is running for Congress in the 5th District in Washington. Hi, Lisa.
Hello. Happy to be with you.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining me. Could we start with just a little bit of background? Could you tell listeners just a little bit about who you are and why you're running for Congress this year?
I grew up in a small town in central Illinois, but I've lived in Spokane, Washington ever since I was in my 20s. I started teaching economics here and was involved on the activist side of politics, helping to organize the first Women Take Back the Night March. Had my son here, taught economics, and ultimately served in our state legislature for many years and as the Senate Majority Leader. I stepped away from that to help start a new medical school, and it's headquartered right here in Eastern Washington and has a mission to serve rural communities and underserved populations. And when I saw what was happening in Congress that was going backwards on health care and not taking on the things people really care about, like the high cost of prescription drugs and the student loan debt crisis, I decided the best way to continue my work on health care and other issues important in my community was to run for Congress.
Great. And the 5th District currently has a Republican incumbent. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of where the 5th District is?
Yes, so the 5th District of Washington is the 10 counties of Eastern Washington. So it's a very big district. It's bigger than the Netherlands, and it is very diverse economically, geographically, and it has rural counties and suburban areas, but also our state's second largest city, the city of Spokane. And it has been represented in Congress for 14 years by Representative Kathy McMorris Rogers. However, before that, when I was first in the state legislature, it was represented by Tom Foley, a Democrat who became Speaker of the House.
And it borders the sort of northern panhandle then of Idaho. And we did an Idaho episode quite a while ago now, and I was surprised how many really strong progressives there were in that part of Idaho, even though we sort of think of it as a conservative state.
Absolutely, and the same is true of Eastern Washington. Sometimes on the west side of the mountains, people see the east side of the mountains as all alike, and it's true. There are a lot of conservative people, but really there's a lot of ideological diversity as well.
So can we talk a little bit then about your background in the state legislature? So you served in the legislature both when Democrats were in the minority party and also in the majority party. So can you talk a little bit about what that experience gives you in terms of insight for kind of figuring out how to work together in Congress? You know, clearly whichever party gets majority, there's going to have to be some bipartisan things going on to get anything done.
Yes, well, the majority is more fun. You don't always get what you want, but you definitely get to help set the agenda, and you do more to move things forward, and you get to vote yes more. However, I've been part of both big majorities and I've been part of a tiny minority, and the reality is that you get the best public policy when you listen to both sides and work with the various stakeholders and interests that are affected by an issue, and then come together and find common ground. And generally speaking, public policy is, I think, better and stronger when there has been an honest effort to include multiple points of view when putting legislation together. That doesn't always work if you're voting for something that's part of your conscience, such as when we were in the legislature and voted to ban discrimination based on sexual orientation. That's not the kind of thing you can compromise on. But a lot of aspects of public policy, like putting together an education policy or a healthcare policy or a budget, you can, in fact, probably make it better by listening carefully to people with dissenting points of view and trying to find common ground.
I very much hope that that's something that the new Congress will be able to do. It doesn't seem like it's being done much by the current majority.
It feels to me like we do need new members of Congress and possibly some shakeup on both sides in terms of having leadership teams that are really committed to representing the interests of people in urban and rural areas, for example, and searching for the common ground versus what seems like has become fairly common in recent years, which is mostly blaming the other side when things don't get done. And this Congress is clearly at the top of the list there, and my opponent, who is in the leadership of the House Republican caucus, is clearly part of the problem now, talking about bipartisanship, but not really producing it when it comes to the farm bill, the tax bill, and certainly on health care.
What are the kinds of issues that the people in the 5th District are really concerned with right now as you talk to them?
I've already mentioned the high cost of healthcare and healthcare insecurity. I've experienced that in my own personal life. My son is 26, so he just aged off my healthcare, and he's a musician. So that type of employer-sponsored healthcare that we started to rely on in our country long ago is not going to be available for him and for many, many people his age. So healthcare is certainly number one for me as an issue that matters to people here all over the district. But also, the student loan debt crisis is really holding back a whole generation of people. It's $1.5 trillion. And I didn't know when I first started looking into this, but 2/3 of that is held by women. And as women, if we, as often is the case, are paid less, it then just takes us longer to pay back that debt. And there are so many people that I've met throughout Eastern Washington who are either struggling themselves to do things they'd like to do, like start a family, buy a house, start a small business, take a job in public service, but they're really hampered by that sort of crushing student debt they're facing. So I'd like to work for relief of that in Congress as well.
What are the things you're doing in these final weeks of the campaign? What are the sorts of events you're doing? How are you trying to reach as many voters as possible?
This part of the campaign is all about voter contact and voter turnout. And so I'm traveling, as I have all year, around the district. We had a town hall on the powwow grounds of the Spokane Indian tribe. I've been in smaller communities like Palouse, Washington, and, of course, had several events in Spokane. As the weather turns to fall, I doubt if we will have as many lemonades with Lisa in the park, but we are still responding to a lot of candidate forums and interest. I'm, in particular, traveling to all the campuses in the district, and we have a lot of campuses. Washington State University and Eastern Washington University and Gonzaga and Whitman and so on. And so going to campuses has been great for me. I love to be with students, having taught students most of my life or been a student. And it's also fun because the questions they ask and their involvement in the political process is so important to our future.
Do you think that Washington being a vote-by-mail state, do you think that gets increased participation among students?
I hope so, and we also have another change this year that I think is a change for the better, and that is you don't need postage on your ballot. So everyone can fill it out and turn it in either by mail or here in Spokane County at any library, and their ballot drop boxes that it can be turned in. So we are excited to see if that can stimulate a little additional participation. Next year, Washington goes to same-day voter registration as well, and it would be great if we had that this year. But still, I'm happy that we're moving in that direction to make it as simple as possible for people to get involved and vote.
What do you think is sort of your path to victory? So this is a district that went pretty heavily for Trump and, as you noted, has had a Republican representative for a while now. But the primaries, and for listeners who aren't aware, the primary in Washington is a top two primary, not a Republican and Democrat primary. And the primaries were quite a bit closer than the sort of Trump percentage would lead you to think it might have been.
So I think that's about two different things. I was just a few points behind in the primary, and I think that's partly because of my reputation and record of working in the community for so many years and really concrete accomplishments that I was able to work with people on. That's my approach is I don't come in with a 10-point program. I let people tell me what they think our challenges and opportunities are. And I really like the aspect of public policy where you come up with a strategy about how to get things accomplished. And so I think that's part of the reason that the race is close. But I also think my opponent, after 14 years, has become increasingly part of sort of the D.C. Beltway way of doing things. She recently brought Vice President Pence here and Congressman Devin Nunes. And to me, that's just an example of what people in Eastern Washington really aren't looking for. They're looking for that kind of authentic, are you here? Are you listening to what matters to us? Are you working with us to get things done? And I think that those dynamics, and she votes very, very consistently with the administration, about 97%, when I'm pretty sure that what I'm hearing from people is they want independence and they want authenticity and someone who is willing to put the interests of our families and veterans and students above special interests.
When I was preparing for this, I came across some articles that talked about when your son was, I believe he was 1, and you had him in the state legislature with you, and you'd brought him onto the floor for a vote and caused sort of a big hubbub. So I was wondering if you could just sort of talk a little bit about kind of the changes you've seen over time in terms of sort of making state legislature or Congress a little friendlier to working moms, but then also sort of where we still have to go.
Yes, that was my first year in the state legislature, and I was a single mom, so we had a late night session. I wasn't quite used to the schedule yet, and so I picked up my son from childcare, and he did, in fact, get kicked off the House floor that evening, but it created a lot of attention to the challenges for working parents, not just legislators, but also staff that would without notice, need to stick around for those late night sessions. So we have made some progress, I think, in Washington State and across the country, but still childcare is not affordable for so many families, and paid family leave is still something that many people don't have access to. And I still think that the challenges of balancing work and family fall much more heavily on women. And so we have a long ways to go. I would love to be part of working for those kinds of solutions at the national level, as we have been able to do somewhat here in Washington State.
Our podcast listeners will know that I'm advocating hard for a mom's caucus in Congress. So,
love that idea.
Is there anything else that you wanted to make sure we talk about?
Just all about everybody's not being discouraged. I know certain things happen that make people discouraged about our political process, but I've been engaged long enough to see that when people get involved at the grassroots or organizational level, and then are able to work with responsive elected officials, you really can move things forward. And so I'd like to just encourage people right now who may be feeling discouraged about the Supreme Court nomination and confirmation to realize that the pendulum can swing, and it's up to us to make that happen.
If our listeners would like to help out your campaign, how can they do that?
Well, that would be great. I'm at lisabrownforcongress.com, and also pretty easy to find on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. On Instagram, I just post fun photos of volunteers, dogs, children, and sort of uplifting things. So would very much appreciate support from any of your listeners, and if any are nearby, come on over and help us knock on doors and contact voters.
All right. Awesome. We'll put a link to your website on our website as well. Thank you so much for speaking with me. This has been really great. And I don't see how anyone in the 5th District could not vote for someone with your experience. And, having taught economics seems like a really valuable skill for us to have in Congress right now. So I hope that everyone in the 5th District realizes that and goes out and votes for you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your fun interviews. Appreciate them.
I'm here in this segment with Jessa Lewis, who is running for the state Senate in the state of Washington in District 6. Hi, Jessa.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining me. So we like to start by asking if you could just tell me a little bit about yourself and why you're running for the state Senate.
I'm one of those who got roped into politics. I dabbled before, but after 2016, it was all right, it's go time. And ended up taking a job as the Eastern Washington Director for Healthcare for All. So I spent the last session in Olympia, because we have an annual session for our state legislature, fighting for single-payer healthcare reform. And we ended up going all the way to the wire. We were half a dozen votes shy, had bipartisan support. And when my opponent wouldn't meet with me, and I just, when we were that close, I decided to run against him to finish the job.
So where in Washington is the Senate District 6, and what's kind of the makeup of the district?
So the 6th Legislative District is basically the neighborhoods and surrounding communities around Spokane. You get the north side with 5 Mile Country Homes, wraps around, gets the West Plains, which has our airport and Fairchild Air Force Base, and Eastern Washington University, and then it comes around the south end of Spokane, which has the South Hill neighborhoods and the northern edge of the Palouse Wheatfield. As far as the makeup of the district, it's very diverse economically. You have people who are at the very top of the economic spectrum to people who are, struggling on fixed incomes, just trying to get by.
I think a lot of people think of the state of Washington as being, West Coast. It must be super Democratic, super blue. But it looks like the state legislature is really split. So can you talk a little bit about that dynamic and why your race is so important?
Absolutely. Well, and at one point, we did have a Democratic supermajority in the House and the Senate. But in recent years, we almost lost both chambers. We're currently only holding the Senate by 1 vote and the House by 2. So with the district that I represent being fully in play for 2 House seats and the Senate seat, just winning in this one district would double our majority, which absolutely changes the kind of legislation we can get passed in Olympia. If you look at the map, basically east of the Cascades is a sea of red, with the exception of one little blue dot, which is the 3rd Legislative District, or Spokane proper. And what we're seeing is that, if I'm able to win the race, I can work with the folks in the 3rd to make sure we're actually getting the investments and infrastructure we need. That's roads, that's schools, that's the water system, and that can absolutely change what Eastern Washington looks like.
You're going around and talking to people and having events. What are the kinds of things that people are saying to you? Are they concerned about state politics? Are they concerned about particular issues? What are you hearing from them?
Of course, the discourse is dominated by national politics right now. What we're finding once we actually really start talking to voters is a focus on hyperlocal issues and on kitchen table issues. So it's less about left versus right and more about healthcare and can we get schools and can we fix the roads and make the roads safer? It's the basics. But I do have to say, at least once a day when I'm out on doors, I'll have someone break down in tears. And it's because they're struggling with the rising cost of rent, with the rising healthcare costs. We've got healthcare costs are going up another 14% in our state next year on the exchange. And when you have people who are skipping meals in order to afford their prescription drugs, the amount of pressure that we're seeing on working class and fixed income retired families is immense right now. And they're so desperate for someone to actually speak to them really, plainly and like a real person. And they're tired of politicians and feeling like no matter who they vote for, that it's not going to change their situation. So I think that we really need to focus on less of who's in the White House and what's happening in D.C. and more of what are we actually going to do to make lives better for people who are struggling right now.
So you are a working mom. What do you think that it does for your perspective on being in the legislature, on the kinds of issues that you think are important, on just campaigning? How does that affect sort of your outlook on politics and on being a politician?
So we actually have a working moms caucus in Olympia.
I love that.
It's a growing group of moms. And one of them especially, I'm just going to give a shout out to Representative Christine Reeves. She's representing a similar district that's in Western Washington, and she's been one of my biggest champions and heroes. And she's someone, who has balanced a job with being in the legislature and being a mom. And there are so many amazing moms in my state that are really leading the charge. And I love that there's a thing. We even have our own hashtag. And I would say the perspective that I'm bringing, so I would be the first ever woman elected to this seat. There's only been one woman elected to represent the 6th district ever, and that was a House seat in our state's entire history. And I think that shows with the fact that we haven't prioritized schools, we haven't prioritized water, and the kind of votes that they're taking. I think that when you're a parent and when you understand the value of money, that you're going to approach votes very differently. You're going to definitely be a little bit more protective of kids and of families. And I think that's a perspective that's sorely needed. And we're definitely finding that it's resonating. I mean, depending on what you look at, I know we have to look at this year in the context of a bigger trend, but we had a double-digit swing in the primary. And this is a district that was seen as safe and wasn't in play. And now it's, at least on the Senate side, it's one of 5 priority races across the state. And having a race in Eastern Washington be in play could really change the map.
I've been saying for like 6 months now that U.S. Congress needs a mom's caucus. So
Yep.
I'm going to tell them to look to Washington to see how to do it. And
Absolutely. I mean, that's our goal. If we can get things started here. And that's honestly one of the reasons why I wanted to run in Eastern Washington is I want to show this is how you win seats in rural or semi-rural conservative-leaning parts of the country, that this is how you win. And I love that there's all these races across the country right now. They're starting to show how, but with that message. And I really think that people want someone they can relate to and trust. And there's something about a mom that you can trust almost at a cellular level, and sometimes politicians take advantage of that. But I think that people are really resonating with that genuine understanding of what it's like to be raising a family right now.
I also wanted to ask you about the issue of guns. So you actually have a concealed carry permit, but have also received a Moms Demand Action gun sense candidate. So can you talk a little bit about that? What sorts of things you think as a gun owner you can bring to sort of this understanding of the kind of gun laws that we should have for public safety, but while not sort of overstepping the bounds in what responsible gun owners might need?
Absolutely. Well, that's the thing is I grew up with a culture of safety. We had to pass, before we could hunt, we had to pass hunter safety. We were trained from an early age to respect and fear guns as lethal tools. They weren't toys. They were how we hunted. They were how we protect ourselves. It was honestly, even into, recent years when times are lean, it's what we hunt helps feed my family. And that's meat that's cruelty-free, that's low carbon, that's healthy, So it's in line with our values. And I understand right now that what we've done is the guns have become toys that we're not enforcing the laws that are already on the books. So for me, I would look less to banning and more to let's mandate training. Like in South Carolina, to get a concealed carry permit, you have to pass, a quick draw. You have to show that you know how to handle firearm. For me, when I got my concealed carry here in Washington State, all it took was $48, a fingerprint, and a background check. And I put myself through classes because, I'd had more experience with rifles and shotguns because I wanted to make sure I was being safe, that I knew what I was doing. You talk to any gun owner, and the one thing that concerns them the most is an idiot who doesn't know what they're doing or isn't being safe. So if we can get responsible gun owners to the table and actually have those kind of conversations on what kind of legislation or laws make sense, what the gaps are, then we can move forward. Because I think that's actually what the majority of gun owners want, is they want to be safe and they want to know that that while their rights are being respected, that we're also making sure that kids and families are safe. Here in the state, we passed an Extreme Order Protection Act where, if someone was a danger to themselves or others, that could be handled and taken care of. And that passed even with a majority in my district. And I think that shows that the people just want common sense gun safety. We're not looking at gun control. I'm not advocating to take anybody's guns. But I think there's things that we can do that they're basic low-hanging fruit that can make people safer. Because in my own district, we had a shooting. We had the Freeman shooting where if the AR-15 hadn't jammed, more lives would have been taken. I've, had a first school shooting where a friend was impacted when I was in middle school. That's a thing where it's become a thing. My daughter's school has had school shootings and threats. And, I was in Seattle when Seattle Pacific had their, there's so many times where it's just become common and it's another shooting, and we need to move on and actually address this issue. It's become so prevalent, and I think we're just tired of it as a society. It's almost like it doesn't even make the news anymore. When news broke of another shooting here in town, my daughter said that's just another shooting. And to where it was a shock for me, to where for her need to cope, for her need to be able to go to school and function as a normal person, she almost has to deaden herself to that reality. And she ended up, because the school had a threat, and she ended up calling me, having a panic attack and anxiety just because there were so few people at school, and the people who were there were afraid. It wasn't a credible threat, so it ended up not being an issue. But just having that hanging over her head made her unable to even be at school. And when she called me and she was sobbing and hyperventilating and having trouble breathing, my assumption was that, that's the last call you ever want to get as a parent. I was like, oh God, it actually happened. And that was one of the worst moments of my life, and my heart dropped. And when you have that experience, how can you not be for figuring out this gun situation, So yeah. It's personal.
Are there any other issues or anything else that you want to make sure that we talk about?
When you run in a swing district, you can't just talk to your base. You have to be able to talk to everyone. And so the majority of my time when I'm knocking on doors, talking to swing voters, and I've actually gone further into Republican territory than would normally be expected as a Democrat. And when you have conversations with people, you just basically start off with, this is my home, this is what I'm working on, what matters to you. And I've experienced people being absolutely shocked when, they tell me they're Republican and we keep talking. And I think what's happened in this culture is we've gotten to this spot of where we're not neighbors anymore. We're on teams. And it's us versus them, and our side needs to win at all costs. And there's even to the point of where I think there's a culture or some sort of language barrier to where, when I was working at Joint Base Lewis-McChord working on what we called energy security, it was actually sustainability. It was, smarter use of energy and energy conservation. But by calling it energy security, a more conservative audience could accept and embrace the work I was doing. And it's when so much is broken down by this language barrier, when we listen to different media, when how the issues are framed are based on our party allegiance, then we stop talking like neighbors. And I found that once I reach out and have these conversations and break down kind of the initial hesitance, that they're shocked. Sometimes they'll say, I've never voted for a Democrat in my life, but I'll vote for you, or you give me hope. And I think that's what we need to be doing as a country right now, is we need to be having conversations, and it needs to not be blaming the other person, or how could you have supported Trump, or how could you not have an issue with Kavanaugh, but how do we talk as neighbors again and family members and actually talk about the issues and not the team? Because if we actually talk about the issues that everyday families are concerned about, that's when we get the vote. That's when Democrats can win, and that's when we can move together. And maybe not necessarily as like a party thing, but as I'm running because I care about this community. And if we can get to that point, then maybe we can turn things around, because it's so easy right now to lose hope and to get caught up in the what ifs and the fears. But I believe voting is an act of hope. And if we can get people to show up to the polls invested in their future, then we can turn this ship around.
That's beautiful. And I very much hope that's the case. I've heard that from a few other people who've been out canvassing and talking to people. And, it really does seem like that face-to-face conversation is the only way that we can heal the country.
Yeah, especially with the divides that are being fostered by the media right now and by politicians, because it's one of those things where if you grab onto one of these splinter issues that's polarizing, then you can, amp up your base. But then all you get voting is your base. We lose all those people in the middle who are tired of politics as usual. And that's why I think our voter engagement has really fallen off. And it's how do we reach those people that don't normally vote? And I really think that we can do this. And it's this new class of candidates. It's these emerging candidates that are coming out that look more like the communities they represent, that are non-traditional and maybe aren't, your normal politicians, that are really driving this conversation. And it is an absolute honor to be such a small, humble part of it. And the people I meet along the way, because you hear, oh, politics is dirty and gross or whatever. And the people I'm meeting as part of this journey are some of the most amazing people I've met in my life. And it really gives me hope. And it's almost like a new sisterhood, because a lot of them are women. And how we mutually invest in each other and take care of each other and lift each other up is something we really need right now. And even having a chance to talk to you on this podcast, it's another connection of yes, you're out there doing the work and sharing a story of hope, and that it doesn't have to be this us versus them, everything's going bad narrative. So thank you.
If our listeners would like to help out your campaign, how can they do that?
An easy way to connect with me is go to electjessalewis.com. That's Jessa Lewis, Lewis. That's the website, and it's also Elect Jessa Lewis on social media, so Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. There's a link to donate, and if anyone would love to phone bank or talk to their neighbors that may live in the area, every little bit helps. But definitely, if you're able to be here, doors is going to be the biggest thing that really changes this race, because you look at what our opponents are doing, they're not outside. They're not on the doors, and we're going to outwork them, and that's how we win this thing.
All right. Excellent. We'll put a link to your website up on our website as well. So, Jessa, thank you so much for speaking with me. This is really great, and I love these kind of stories about the way we think that we can bring people back together. I'm really inspired by those kind of campaigns. So thank you so much.
I appreciate it. I mean, you think about it, it wasn't that long ago that I was living in the car with my kid. And, and now I'm in this position to potentially be elected to the, upper chamber of my state government. How cool is that? and how amazing is it that we can, that we live in a government where someone like me can run and have a shot. So thank you. This was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Wethlin and was created for use by this podcast.